Hi guys, welcome back. This is part 2 in my video series on how to paint an elite gendarme of the Imperial Guard. So obviously a pretty impressive looking cavalry unit from the Napoleonic era. Last week I talked about how to paint the horse and his tack and saddle blanket and all that good stuff. I'll link to that in the description box if you want to catch up, if you've missed that. And if you've already seen it, welcome back. Today I'm going to be continuing on by painting the rider and, his uniform and all of that stuff. The paints that you see here are everything you're going to need for him except the skin tones because, I don't usually cover that in these videos. There's plenty of skin tone tutorials on my channel. You can just search for the skin tone playlist if you want more information on that. So, okay, let's go ahead and dive right in to painting the model. I'm going to start off by working on the rider's pants and waistcoat and gloves. These appear to have been a buff color in most cases, though I actually have seen pictures where it looks more white. And if it's an undressed version of the uniform, then you're going to see dark blue pants, kind of like the rest of the jacket. So there's some variation possible here. But I honestly really I think the buff the best. I like how it combines with that dark blue. It's just a really pretty combination. So that's definitely what I'm doing here. My base coat here is going to be Vallejo khaki gray. For my first highlight on the buff areas, I'm going to make a kind of a 50-50 mix of the khaki and Vallejo buff. Buff, self-explanatory, isn't it? Right? I use buff. And I'm just going to try to apply nice, thin, even coats here. And you're going to have to apply several because for whatever the nature of this kind of base color, the things that you apply on top of it tend not to go on very evenly, especially these kind of lighter shades we're working with when we do buff. So you're really going to have to build up the layers here and really spend a lot of time to make sure that there's not any sort of patchiness in the sort of highlight coats that you're applying. And my next highlight now is just going to be pure buff, and the same thing goes as in the last step, but actually even more so. You need to apply a lot of thin, even layers here and really build it up and really spend a lot of time making sure that there aren't any sort of blotchy effects in the coverage, because you really want this to look nice and smooth and creamy and soft and not have any areas where it looks like there's some darker color kind of showing through in areas where you don't want it, or just kind of not coming across as a nice, really blended kind of effect. Since I think subtlety is really, really important with this buff area, if you hadn't gotten that already, I'm applying another highlight now. And this is a mixture of the buff with some ivory, Vallejo ivory, to lighten it up. You can use white, but I think ivory works better because it's got just that slight warm cast that you really need with the buff. And again, I'm really just building it up now and really kind of trying to push some of those sort of brighter areas where light's hitting more and just pump up the contrast. If you did a good job with the last two layers, you shouldn't have any more coverage issues. And if you apply your kind of really light highlights over top of it, you shouldn't really have to worry too much now about blotchiness, because sort of the under layer should be sort of light enough, and it should all sort of just work together now a lot better. So just make sure you put in that time earlier on to make sure you have a nice smooth looking sort of build up of paint. I'm going to finish up with one final highlight now of just pure ivory. I'm going to try to keep this light. I've got my paint pretty thin here, and I'm just going to put it on areas where I want some really extreme highlights, and on creases and folds and kind of those kind of sharp areas and all. I prefer my buff to be fairly yellow looking, so I try not to go overboard with the really light colors here in this last step, because otherwise you risk maybe making it look a little bit too white. But depending on your taste, you could do that too, and it'll still produce kind of a nice color. It'll just be a little bit different. Now the body of the jacket, it's going to be a really dark blue color, just like the same shade we used on the saddle blanket for the horse. So I'm going to be base coating the jacket with a mixture of black and dark Prussian blue from Vallejo. And then my next highlight is going to be just pure dark Prussian blue. And remember, again, apply at least several coats of this, and keep your paint fairly thick. Even if you think it doesn't make any difference, trust me, after a few layers you'll start to see it better. But if you only apply like one coat of this over an almost black base, you're hardly going to be able to see anything, and it's not really going to do you very much good. Now I'm just going to try and draw out that blue color a little bit, because even though it's realistic for it to be this dark in real life, you gotta put some artificial contrast in there, like I said in the part 1 of this video, or it's just not gonna look very good at this scale. So again, I've mixed gray blue into my dark Prussian blue to lighten it. At first, not very much, just a dab because it's powerful. And you can see I'm gonna be applying it now to areas of the jacket where light's hitting, and wrinkles and folds, and just areas where I want to sort of define. I usually try to start at kind of the edges of the sort of individual pieces of fabric, or the tops, and then sort of apply down where it's kind of dragging and blending the color out, so that we still definitely maintain areas with that really, really dark color in there, because we want the overall impression of the jacket to be really quite dark when you kind of look at it from a distance. I'm going to finish the jacket by adding just a little bit more of the gray blue in, and again applying one final highlight. And I'm really focusing this on really sharp folds and creases, really easy as an edge highlight kind of along seams and stuff. And I'm still again making sure that I keep plenty of that really dark blue in there too, to sort of balance it out. But it really does help to apply this even just in very tiny amounts, just because it'll really help just define sort of the different parts of the uniform jacket. Now the front piece on the jacket, kind of the turnbacks, and there's sort of a patch on the top of the hat are all going to be red. I am base coating those areas right now with a mixture of black and black red. And I'm doing that because I really want it to start out dark and really be able to have some contrast between dark and light. So you almost, with these kinds of colors, I find you can really never start out too dark with your base layer. I'm then going to continue highlighting the red areas first. I'm going to use a layer of just pure black red, and then I'm going to go over it with a mixture of 50-50 of black red and Citadel Mephiston red. Just keep building that up, obviously applying the brighter colors to the area where you want more light hitting, but try to leave some of those dark reds in there and kind of blend into them, because it'll just give you more contrast and more range. And then I'm going to continue on then with a coat of just pure Mephiston red, building that up on everything with several layers so that I can get kind of the maximum intensity and saturation. And then to get the red even brighter, I'm now going in with a layer of Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet. My sort of observation is the reds in these French Napoleonic uniforms are very bright and very saturated, and you really want that contrast with the dark blue of the jacket. So you really want to build this up, really get a bright, brilliant color. So again, several layers of that Evil Sun Scarlet so that it gets nice and bright. And then just for even more contrast, I'm finishing off the red with an edge highlight, which I made by mixing the Evil Sun Scarlet with just a bit of Vallejo buff, so that I get kind of a warm cream pink color. Again, so that you don't make your jacket look kind of faded and worn out, you don't want to apply too much of this, kind of keep it to the edges. One thing you can do is you can actually apply it in a large area and then go back over it with the Evil Sun Scarlet, and then you can kind of use that as a way to get an even sort of brighter red color without it being sort of faded, just because that lighter base then will brighten the color that you put on top of it. I do that sometimes too when I'm kind of working on these things and I feel like I maybe got a little bit too much of that faded pink color in there and I want to pull it back to more of just a true, bright, brilliant red. I'm going to be working on the black leather boots and stirrups next. I'm base coating them with black, and also while I'm at it here, I'm going to be base coating his big fur hat, which is basically black as well. I actually ended up having to go back in later and apply more black paint to it because of that rough texture. The paint tends to wear off real easily while you're working on other things. So, you know, if you want to do that later and just wait, not do it now, that's fine too. I'm not going to work on highlighting the boots. I'm keeping this real simple. I'm just taking the black and I'm just mixing sort of increasing amounts of neutral gray into it just to keep lightening it. And I just apply those layers over and over again on the boots. I'm making my steps pretty gradual because experience has taught me that with black leather, you don't want to go too hard or too heavy with the highlights. You want to keep it subtle and kind of stepped. Though, because this guy is kind of fancy and he's probably going to have well-polished, shiny boots, this is a good opportunity to try to build up some sort of shiny effects on the leather. And you've got an advantage here because of how he's going to be sitting on the horse. It's very clear where the shine would be. It's not going to be like behind his legs or underneath. It's really going to be on that outside sort of side of his calf. So you can kind of sort of start building up sort of a line or a strip of lighter gray going down the side just with blending. And you're going to see me doing that here as I apply lighter and lighter shades. Some areas I'm not going to lighten too much, but I'm going to really start building up this sort of highlight, sort of shiny highlight on the sides because, yeah, this should be very highly polished black leather. So to have some of that shine there is going to be a good thing. To really emphasize that super shiny polished area, I kind of finished my final highlights on the boots by mixing some really light sky gray in there, which gets the tone even lighter. And you can see this I'm going to apply just really very sparingly. I'm not going to put it too much on the boots, and I'm really going to focus it on that area that I'm building up on the side that I want to look like it's got kind of a shiny kind of effect going on, and really kind of avoid applying it sort of on the insides of his legs or areas like that. And the inside of his legs particularly, you're not going to see at all because they're just going to be against the horse. Okay, so now it's on to all the braid on his uniform. This is an officer, so this is all going to be silver again, and just like on the horse, we're going to be trying to go for sort of a light, simple, relatively simple non-metallic metal effect. I'm going to start out by base coating all these areas with the Vallejo neutral gray, and just like on the horse, because I want to have sort of a more of a silver look, I'm trying to give it more of a blue cast, so I've mixed a bit of gray blue in there. And I'm going to continue adding that as I kind of highlight up these areas. For my first highlights on all the sort of braid and trim, I've just taken some sky gray and used it to lighten my base. And I've again added in more blue to really keep that in there. Right out of the gate with this braid, because it's so fine and thin, and you really want to get a lot of contrast as soon as possible, I'm really going to start applying this to all the sort of higher areas and really making sure I establish that that dark base color is kind of going to be down in all of the shadow areas, like sort of, so like between, for example, the fringes on his epaulette, sort of down in between all the cords and braids, anywhere in his uniform, and on the embroidery on his turnbacks. You want to leave that as sort of the defining edge color between the sort of the different areas. So really, you know, start getting those dark colors locked in where you want them right away, and then kind of as we go on from there, you're not really going to want to touch them or mess with them any further. Next highlight is going to be almost pure sky gray with a bit, again, of the gray blue in it. I'm doing the same thing. I'm keeping my paint reasonably thick here. I mean, yes, it needs to flow because you're working with fine detail areas, but there's an advantage to having it thick enough that it goes on really intense right away, because obviously with these really fine areas, you don't want to have to go back in and paint over and over the same areas, because it tends to make it easier to make mistakes. So just be careful about that. And obviously I'm using a real small brush here. You know, you won't be able to get the control you need if you don't. And yeah, I'm just this sort of pretty light color here. I'm just kind of, on a lot of the braid areas, I'm just trying to make it look, if there's sort of a long sort of band of braid, I try to make it look like, so there's sort of light or lighter gray on sort of one end or one part of it, then sort of darker areas on others. And you can do that really nicely with all the tassels. So you can kind of focus the lighter colors towards the bottom and then have it darker towards the top. And, you know, on the bands, obviously just kind of building up lighter where light's hitting. And yeah, just, you know, kind of going around and building it up. And again, it still looks pretty gray, and as with all of these sort of braid, non-metallic metal braid effects, it's all going to pop off when you apply the highest highlight color. And that's where we're at now. I've got some white here, and I've just got just a touch of the gray blue in there to keep my sort of bluish tone going. And I'm going to really be using the paint as heavy as I can get away with, so it still goes on okay. And you can see I'm really pumping big, sort of nice, strong dots of precise color onto those areas where I really want to look like there's light kind of reflecting off the metal edge. And this sort of really bright light color, again, right next to those really dark areas, is going to give you that shiny metal effect that you're looking for. And as I said before on the horse, I do like to paint braid like this in non-metallic metal and not true metal paint, just because I think it looks strange when you've got any sort of fabric surface to use true metal paint, and it will make things like that sword and scabbard, which you want to do in true metal, look really weird and just not make any sense when you've got then the sort of the fabric areas painted with that same kind of paint. What I'm doing now is I'm going to be painting some areas on this model that are going to end up being kind of gold or brass. And I'm just doing a base coat here of Vallejo German Camouflage Black Brown. And that's going to go right now on his scabbard, the hilt and grip of his saber, and also on this little medal that he's wearing on his chest. I don't know exactly what medal it is. I'm sure there's that you could find it out, but I'm going to be honest, I don't really care. So I'm just going to paint it as sort of a gold medal with like a little bit of a blue fabric sort of band holding it up. Once the German Camouflage Black Brown was on there, I went over it with a fairly sort of dark base highlight, which was a mixture of the German Camouflage Black Brown again and some Army Painter Greedy Gold. And I'm going to start off that with a pretty dark metallic color just to build from. And then from there, I'm going to take just pure Greedy Gold. I'm going to keep it kind of thin and start building that then up over on top of all those areas. And then finish that highlight process on the gold brass by mixing some Vallejo Air silver into my Greedy Gold, so that you get kind of this, I don't know, grayish, goldish color. And I apply that then really sparingly, kind of as an edge highlight to really bring sort of extra shine to the metal. And the advantage there too is applying that color will make your kind of overall effect a little bit more brassy and a little bit more cold, which is actually kind of what you want to see on probably the metal areas of this particular model. Now for the steel areas, and then the main thing there, of course, is the sword blade. I'm base coating that with a mixture of black and Vallejo Air gunmetal. I'm also going to use it as a base coat on any other sort of incidental metal bits, like sort of the buttons on his jacket and his stirrups, stuff like that. Then I'm going to do sort of extensive highlighting on the sword. I'm going to start out kind of going gradually. I'll just first mix in a bit more gunmetal into my black to get it a little lighter, kind of apply that. Then I'll move up to kind of pure gunmetal, and then From there, I'll work a bit of the Vallejo Air silver in there to get it real shiny, apply that, and then finish off with just pure Vallejo Air silver, just as edge highlight along sort of the cutting surface of the blade. And that usually looks really, really nice. And that highest highlight color, you want to then use that as to apply highlight to all the buttons and little incidental metal bits. There's no reason to apply sort of more subtle gradations of highlight to those because they're just too small and it wouldn't really do you any good. So, you know, you can just kind of wait and then just dab on the silver or whatever color, sort of high bright color you want when you're just about almost done. Now I'm back to working on that fuzzy hat. At this point, again, as I said, reapply black paint if you need to because of kind of wear. And the way I'm highlighting this is I'm going to take the black and I'm just going to start kind of adding successive increasing quantities of brown sand to this. And what this is going to do is kind of give the hat an overall black look, but it's going to be kind of a warm black with a little just sort of a brown cast, which I think is going to be really nice for this kind of furry effect. So the first layer won't have too much brown in it. It's just going to look like kind of a warm gray. And then I'm going to add in kind of more and more brown and sort of, I'm really just picking out individual strands here with my small brush on the hat. You know, obviously you want to put some more brighter, lighter highlighted areas towards the top of the hat where you expect more light to hit and where you're going to get a little bit more of a shininess. And then you maybe want to keep some slightly, you know, less high highlights in some of the furry bits, you know, more down towards the base. Once I was done with the highlights on the hat, I then went back in with some Null and Oil Wash just to kind of unify everything, darken it a little bit, and really get an extra contrast down in sort of all the sculpted areas between the hair strands. Now for the white feather plume, and whether you've got an officer or a normal trooper, irregardless of whether the braid is silver or white, in other words, this plume is always going to be white. So I'm going to just apply a base coat to start off with of the Vallejo Sky Gray. Next, I'm going to be applying kind of an overbrush here of just pure white. Kind of see I'm using the side of my brush and trying not to get it down in the cracks too much, and just kind of building that up here until I've got a pretty nice white color everywhere. I then finished that plume by applying a very, very watered down wash of Null and Oil to get down into the cracks and recesses, and then I let that dry, and then I went back in with another overbrush of white just to bring out that brilliant whiteness that got lost a little bit by the wash. And so here he is. Here is the finished elite gendarme of the Imperial Guard. I took him off of that stick I was using to paint him, and then I glued him down onto the horse. I did a little bit of touch-up work on paint that was a little bit flaky, and I finished everything off with a nice, thick, sort of matte varnish, and that was partially to sort of dull down some of the colors that tend to be a little reflective, like that dark blue, and also just to protect from any additional sort of flaking of paint on some of those rough areas like the mane and tail and stuff, because they really are prone to it on models like this. I'm really, really happy with the finished effect on this guy. I think he looks really spectacular. And he's definitely more somber and sort of subdued looking than, say, you know, a Hussar or something. And that was basically what I said at the beginning. This is, by Napoleonic standards, a fairly austere unit. But with that black horse and just all that dark color, you know, if you do this right, it really, really looks nice. But I guess, to be fair, pretty much any Napoleonic cavalry you paint, if you paint it well, it's going to look impressive as hell. And this is a really nice sculpt by Gringo 40s. They did a really good job with it. And their models tend to be a bit more on the sort of large, heroic side in regards to proportions. And that's something that really tends to fit really well with my painting style. I like painting models more on that bigger end of things. So for me, that made the process just go a little bit easier, and it was just really, really rewarding as a result. And I'm just really, really happy with this. It was a lot of work, but I hope even if you are not going to want to paint your models to this standard, hopefully you learned something about maybe non-metallic metal silver, or painting black horses, or painting dark blue. Anyway, you get something out of this that you can apply to your painting, kind of whatever your level or attention span is. So again, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like it, share it, leave me comments and questions, of course, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. It's always appreciated. So that's all for now, and I'll see you next time.